The alarm didn't go off gradually. It detonated. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, the third-floor ICU of Mercy General Hospital erupted into chaos so fast that the night staff barely had time to register what was happening before it had already become something none of them would ever forget. A body on a gurney, a flatline on the monitor, and a nurse standing in the middle of the hallway, holding a syringe she was not authorized to use. She hadn't asked permission. She hadn't called the on-duty physician. She hadn't followed a single step of the hospital's 62-page emergency response protocol. She had simply acted. And in the 30 seconds that followed, every nurse on that floor stopped what they were doing. Every monitor beeped in eerie synchrony, and the man who had been dying breathed. One breath, then another. But that's not the part that should shock you. The part that should shock you is what happened next. Dr. Harlan Webb, Chief of Emergency Medicine, 17-year veteran of Mercy General, a man whose photograph hung in the hospital's lobby between a senator and a city mayor, walked down that hallway, looked at the nurse, looked at the man now breathing on the gurney, and said 6 words with the cold certainty of someone who had never once been wrong. "You're fired. Get out of my hospital." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't explain herself. She simply removed her badge, set it on the nurse's station counter without a sound, and walked toward the elevator. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. The man she had just saved was still breathing when the elevator doors closed behind her. His name was Patient 4471, see in the hospital's records. He had no family listed, no emergency contact, no one waiting at home. But he had something tucked inside the breast pocket of his hospital gown, something the nurses wouldn't discover until nearly 2 hours later, when the world outside began to change. First came the calls, 17 of them, in rapid succession, all to the hospital's administrative line. Then came the black vehicles. Not police cars, not ambulances, not the press. Military vehicles. 4 of them, parking in a formation that blocked every exit from Mercy General's main campus. Men in tactical gear taking positions at the doors. A figure in a dark suit walking directly to the administration desk and presenting credentials that made the overnight receptionist, a woman who had worked in hospitals for 23 years and thought she had seen everything, go completely pale. The figure asked one question: "Where's the nurse who was terminated tonight?" And that's when everyone at Mercy General realized something with a cold, creeping certainty that no protocol could have prepared them for. They hadn't fired a rogue employee. They had just made the worst mistake of their careers. But who was she? Her name, according to her personnel file, was Maya Chun. Age 34. 5'4". Employee of the month twice in the past year. Exemplary reviews. 0 disciplinary incidents, until tonight. She had been hired 3 years ago through a standard staffing agency, arriving with credentials from a nursing program in Virginia and a letter of recommendation so generic it could have been written about anyone. The hiring manager, pressed for staff and impressed by her quiet confidence during the interview, had barely glanced at the letter before extending an offer. Maya had accepted without negotiating the salary. That was the first thing people remembered about her. Later, when everything came out, they remembered the small things that had seemed unremarkable at the time. She never negotiated. She never complained about double shifts. She never lost her composure. Not once. Not during the cardiac arrest in room 14, not during the multi-vehicle trauma intake in March, not even during the incident with the psych patient who had put 2 orderlies in the ER. While everyone around her was reacting, some screaming, some freezing, Maya had moved to the nearest doorframe, assessed the room in what witnesses described as less than a second, and positioned herself in exactly the right place to de-escalate the situation before security arrived. They had given her a commendation for that. She had put it in her locker and never mentioned it again. Her coworkers liked her. Mostly. She was warm when warmth was needed, efficient when efficiency mattered, and unusually quiet in the spaces between. She didn't go to after-shift drinks. She didn't participate in the hospital gossip that circulated through the break room like its own kind of contagion. She brought her lunch in a plain black container every day and ate it in exactly 15 minutes. "She's just private," her colleague Dana had said once. Like, genuinely private. Not cold. Just contained. There were other things too. Small things. Things that each person who worked with Maya had noticed individually and never thought to share until it was too late. She always sat with her back to the wall in the break room. When the fire drill happened last spring and the alarm went off with no warning, every nurse in the unit startled. Some knocked over their coffee. One nearly dropped a medication tray. Maya had simply lowered her pen, looked once at each exit, and stood up in a single fluid motion. Calm as someone who had heard that sound 1,000 times before in places far more serious than a hospital drill. She scanned rooms when she entered them. Not obviously, not like someone paranoid. But she did it. A quick, practiced sweep that registered every person, every object, every exit. A few of the older nurses had noticed it. They assumed she was just thorough, meticulous, a product of good training. She knew things she shouldn't have known. Not medical things. Her medical knowledge was exceptional, but that could be explained. It was the other things. The way she had looked at a new patient last winter, a man who claimed to be a traveling salesman, and said quietly to her charge nurse, "Make sure there are always 2 staff members in his room. Never leave him alone with anyone." When the charge nurse had asked why, Maya had simply said, "Gut feeling." 2 days later, hospital security had discovered the man was attempting to access the pharmaceutical storage under false pretenses. Gut feeling. That's what she called it. Her hands were another thing, steady in a way that went beyond training. A surgical resident who had scrubbed into an emergency procedure alongside her once had told the story at every party for a year afterward. She handed me instruments in the sequence I needed them before I asked for them. Every single time. Like she already knew what I was going to do next. He had assumed she was just experienced. Intuitive. He had no other framework for it. There were also the scars. Not many. Nothing dramatic. But the kind of nurse who changes into scrubs in the locker room alongside you for 3 years, you notice. 2 small marks on her left forearm. A longer, faded line along her right shoulder, visible only when she reached up to a high shelf. Dana had asked about it once, casual, the way you do. Maya had smiled. Old rock climbing accident. Dana had believed her. Why wouldn't she? She was just a nurse. An excellent nurse. A quiet, private, impossibly calm nurse who happened to have the situational awareness of someone trained to operate in environments where one wrong read of the room could be the last mistake you ever made. But no one connected the dots. Not until the military vehicles arrived. Mercy General was the kind of hospital that believed in hierarchy the way some people believe in religion. There was an order to things. A ladder. A protocol for every conceivable situation, laminated and posted in every break room, every supply closet, every nurse's station. The hospital had won 3 consecutive accreditation awards. It had a patient satisfaction score that administration discussed at board meetings with the reverence usually reserved for scripture. And at the top of that ladder, above the department heads, above the administrators, above even the chief medical officer who spent most of his time at conferences, sat Dr. Harlan Webb. He hadn't always been like this. The older nurses remembered a younger version of him. Hungry, brilliant, occasionally kind. That version had been buried slowly under 17 years of being right, of being deferred to, of walking into rooms where every face turned toward him with the expression of people awaiting a verdict. Power does things to people. It had done things to Harlan Webb. By the time Maya Chin joined his department, he had become the kind of authority figure who confused respect with fear. He made rounds with an entourage of residents who nodded at everything he said and laughed slightly too hard at his jokes. He referred to the nursing staff in meetings as support personnel. He had once, in front of a full room of staff, corrected a senior nurse's medication recommendation, correctly, but with a cruelty in the delivery that left the room silent for a long, uncomfortable beat. The nurses had a name for the expression on his face when he was about to humiliate someone. They called it the Webb look. You always knew it was coming. The slight tilt of the head. The pause that lasted 1 second too long. The smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maya had been on the receiving end of the Webb look exactly twice before tonight. The first time was 6 months after she was hired. A patient had been deteriorating in a way that the attending resident was missing, focused on the wrong set of numbers. Maya had flagged it quietly during rounds. Not grandstanding. Not even particularly assertive. Just a clear, calm observation. His lactate trend over the past 4 hours suggests early septic progression. The current antibiotic coverage may be insufficient. The room had gone still. Residents didn't contradict attendings during rounds. Nurses certainly didn't. Dr. Webb had turned to look at her with that expression. The tilt. The pause. The smile. "Thank you, Nurse Chin. We'll let the physicians handle the medicine." The patient had been upgraded to the ICU 4 hours later. Exactly as Maya had predicted. Webb never mentioned it again. The second time was 3 months ago. A resource allocation dispute. Overtime, staffing ratios, the kind of grinding operational conflict that wears down hospital staff over years. Maya had submitted a written request, formal and documented, through proper channels. When it reached Webb's desk, he had returned it with a single sentence handwritten in red across the top. Nursing staff concerns should be directed to nursing administration, not to department heads. She had filed it. Said nothing. The other nurses had watched both interactions carefully. There was a type of person, most of them had met one at some point, who, when treated like that, burns. Who lets the resentment accumulate until it either explodes or poisons them from the inside. They watched Maya for signs of that burning. There were none. She's either a saint or she's got a plan, Dana had said once. It was meant as a joke. Looking back, it wasn't. The supporting characters in this story orbited Maya and Webb like planets around competing suns. Dana Reyes, funny, fiercely loyal, the kind of nurse who made the difficult shift survivable and who had quietly looked out for Maya since day one, sensing something in her she couldn't name. James Ortiz, the overnight charge nurse, fair, overworked, trying to do right by his staff in a system that constantly asked more than it gave. Dr. Priya Nair, a second-year resident with the talent of someone 5 years her senior and the discomfort of someone who had noticed Maya's competence and didn't know whether to be relieved or unnerved by it. And then there was the patient in room 12, the man with no emergency contact. The man who had come in that evening listed as a cardiac event, accompanied by no one, speaking to no one, looking at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a person who has trained themselves not to show what they're thinking. Maya had checked his vitals herself 3 times that evening, which was once more than protocol required. She had also done something else, something James Ortiz would only remember after the vehicles arrived outside. She had asked to see his admission paperwork, not to correct anything, not for any medical reason. She had looked at his listed name and gone very, very still for just a moment. A fraction of a second. The kind of stillness that you'd only notice if you were watching closely. James had been watching closely. He hadn't known what he was seeing at the time. At 11:47 p.m., the flatline changed everything. The evening before the crisis had been what hospital staff called a slow burn shift. Not quiet, never truly quiet, but the kind of shift where the emergencies were manageable, the crises were contained, and the exhaustion came not from intensity, but from the relentless, grinding accumulation of small things. Vital checks, medication rounds, the soft, endless human need of patients in rooms who pressed their call buttons not for emergencies, but because the night was long and they were frightened in the presence of another person. Even a tired one in blue scrubs made the darkness feel slightly less absolute. Maya worked through it with her characteristic stillness, but she was not relaxed. Dana noticed it first, the way you notice a change in air pressure before a storm. Nothing you could point to directly, just a quality of attention, Maya's attention, which was always high, running at something closer to maximum. Her eyes moving slightly faster between the rooms. Her path through the floor just barely more deliberate. You okay? Dana had asked, somewhere around 9 p.m. Fine, Maya said. And then, after a beat, how's the patient in 12? Stable. Labs came back borderline, but Webb said to monitor and reassess. Maya had looked at the room for a moment. What was his resting heart rate on the last check? 72. She nodded, said nothing more. But 20 minutes later, Dana saw her at the nurse's station pulling room 12's chart and reading it not the way nurses read charts for information, skimming, familiar, but the way someone reads a document when they're searching for something specific, something they're not sure is there. At 9:40 p.m., the first small incident. A new resident, fresh rotation, 3rd week on the floor, was drawing up a medication for a patient in room 8. Routine. Standard dose. He had done it a dozen times. Maya passed by, slowed almost imperceptibly, glanced at the syringe. That's 0.5 milligrams over, she said. Quiet. Factual. No drama. The resident checked. She was right. He looked up to thank her. She was already gone. He told the story later that night in the resident lounge. Not because it was remarkable, just because it was the kind of thing you mention when you're trying to make sense of someone. At 10:15 p.m., the second incident. A code call on the 2nd floor, not her patient, not her floor. Mercy General's protocol was clear. Staff remained with their assigned patients unless directly called. The on-duty team had the situation covered. Maya had nonetheless positioned herself at the stairwell door. Just stood there. 4 minutes. James Ortiz had clocked it. You good? He'd called across the station. Just stretching, she said. He'd let it go. Later, he would think about those 4 minutes differently. About how she had stood with her weight slightly forward, her head angled toward the sounds coming up from the floor below. Not curious. Not concerned. Alert. The way a person stands when they're prepared to move. The code resolved without her. She returned to rounds. At 10:52 p.m., the third incident. Two visitors arrived at the nurse's station asking about a patient on a different floor, clearly lost, anxious, a husband and wife searching for a room number. Standard. Maya was behind the station completing charting. She looked up when they approached. And for just a moment, Dana would swear to this later, under circumstances she could never have imagined, Maya's hand moved. Not toward anything. Not reaching for anything. Just a small, controlled motion toward her left side. The way a person's hand moves from pure muscle memory toward a place where something used to be. She caught it immediately. The hand returned to the keyboard. She smiled at the visitors and directed them to the elevator. Dana had seen it. She didn't say anything. What would she have said? Your hand moved strangely? It was nothing. It was a long shift. People did strange things when they were tired. Except Maya, she never seemed tired. That was the thing. That was always the thing. By 11:15 p.m., the tension on the floor had ratcheted upward in a way no one could articulate. The kind of atmospheric shift that precedes things. Animals feel it before earthquakes. Experienced nurses feel it before the bad cases come in. Something invisible and electric. Maya had stopped pretending to chart. She was standing near the station, watching room 12. His sats are dropping, she said, not to anyone in particular. James pulled up the monitor. They're within range. They're trending. Look at the last 40 minutes, not the last reading. He looked. She was right. Borderline. Not yet alarming. Not enough for an emergency escalation under protocol. I'll flag it for Webb, James said. Do it now, Maya said. The quality of her voice when she said it. Dana would describe it later as not a nurse's voice anymore. Not aggressive. Not panicked. But carrying a weight that made you stop and listen the way you stopped and listen to a sound you couldn't identify in a dark room. James paged Webb. Webb took 11 minutes to respond. He looked at the numbers. He said, monitor and reassess at midnight, and walked back to his office. Maya watched him go. 32 minutes later, the flatline alarm went off, and Maya Chun, who had already been walking toward room 12 before the alarm sounded, before it, Dana would insist, she was already moving, did what she did. And everything changed. The sound of a flatline monitor is not subtle. It is designed to be the loudest thing in the room. A single, sustained tone that cuts through every other sound in a hospital unit. The beeping of other monitors, the low hum of ventilators, the quiet murmur of voices, and announces itself with a kind of brutal simplicity that permits no misunderstanding. Someone is dying. At 11:47 p.m., that tone erupted from room 12, and for approximately 3 seconds, 3 seconds that each person on the floor would later describe with strange, hyper-detailed clarity, nobody moved. That's not unusual. There's a fraction of a second between stimulus and response that exists even in trained professionals. The brain processes, the body follows. 3 seconds is not unusual, but Maya Chun was already moving before the first second ended. Dana saw it from the nurse's station. Maya was not running. She was moving with a particular controlled speed that was somehow faster than running, the way certain people move who have learned that panic costs time and costs lives. She was through the door of room 12 in 2 seconds flat. What happened next unfolded in overlapping chaos that different witnesses would later describe slightly differently, the way people always describe the same event from different angles of shock. The patient, the man with no emergency contact, no family listed, the man with something hidden in the pocket of his gown, had gone into full cardiac arrest. VFib, his heart not stopped, but seizing, quivering, unable to pump. The monitor screaming its single sustained note. The protocol for this was clear. Documented. Laminated. Posted. Call the code. Wait for the code team. Begin chest compressions. Do not, under any circumstances, without physician authorization, administer medications unsanctioned by the attending. Maya had picked up the crash cart before the code was called. She had her hand on the defibrillator while the code team was still being paged. And she had the syringe, epinephrine, drawn from the crash cart's own supply, correct dosage, correct gauge, in her hand, and was assessing the patient's for access before the first code team member came through the door. What are you doing? The voice belonged to Dr. Kevin Marsh, a third-year resident who had responded to the code, arriving breathless to find a nurse already running a resuscitation. He's in VFib, duration approximately 90 seconds, Maya said, not looking up. Last BP was 90/58 trending down for 40 minutes. I'm going to cardiovert. I need you on compressions. You can't. Kevin. The name, spoken quietly, with a weight that stopped him. Get on his chest. Now. He got on his chest. Later, he would say he had no idea why he listened. It wasn't authority. It wasn't rank. It was something else. Something in the way she spoke that told him, without explanation, that she was the most qualified person in that room. The defibrillator charged. Clear. The first shock delivered at approximately 11 minutes 49. The patient arched slightly. The monitor continued its flat scream. Resuming compressions, Maya said, already repositioning. She drew the syringe. The epinephrine. The thing she was not authorized to administer without a physician's direct order. Dr. Marsh was on compressions, a resident, not an attending, unable under protocol to authorize the medication. Dr. Webb had not been reached. The code team attending was 45 seconds away. 45 seconds. Maya looked at the monitor. She looked at the patient. She made a decision that would end her career at Mercy General, and she made it with the same quiet certainty with which she did everything. She administered the epinephrine. Charging again, she said. Clear. The second shock delivered. For 2 seconds, the monitor continued screaming. Then it changed. Not to a flat line. Not to the chaotic violence of V-fib. To a rhythm. Unsteady, thready, but a rhythm. The jagged peaks of a heartbeat reappearing on the screen like signals coming back online after a blackout. The patient breathed. One long, ragged inhale, the chest rising with the desperate urgency of a man returning from a very far distance. The code team attending, Dr. Lisa Young, arrived in the doorway at that moment, took in the scene in a single glance, and went immediately to the patient's side. She worked methodically for 2 minutes, stabilizing, assessing, confirming what Maya had already done. Then she looked up. The room was full. The code had drawn 6 staff members in various stages of arrival, all of them now standing in a loose, stunned half-circle. Dr. Marsh was still at the bedside, looking at his own hands as if surprised by what they'd done. Dana stood in the doorway, one hand pressed flat to the doorframe. And Maya Chun stood at the foot of the bed, the empty syringe still in her hand, watching the monitor with an expression that was not relief, not pride, not triumph. It was something else. Something older and quieter than any of those things. It was the expression of someone who had done this before, who had stood in rooms like this, maybe rooms nothing like this, rooms with dirt floors and open skies, and sounds no hospital ever made, and made decisions under pressure and lived with them. Dr. Webb arrived 4 minutes after the flatline alarm. The crisis was already over. He stood in the doorway of room 12, looked at the stabilized patient, looked at the code team, looked at Dr. Young's controlled expression, looked at the empty syringe. Then he looked at Maya. The Webb look. Longer than usual this time. You administered epinephrine without physician authorization, he said. Not a question. Yes, Maya said. You initiated cardioversion without authorization. Yes. You ran a code, without attending oversight. She held his gaze. He's alive. That, Webb said, with the slow precision of someone who had rehearsed this type of sentence, is entirely beside the point. And he delivered the 6 words. You're fired. Get out of my hospital. The room was completely silent. Dr. Young opened her mouth, closed it. Dr. Marsh stared at the floor. Dana took 1 step forward, stopped. And Maya Chun removed her badge, set it on the counter at the foot of bed 12, and walked out. She walked past the nurse's station without stopping. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside. And as the doors closed, she looked out at the floor, at Dana, at James, at the faces of co-workers who had worked beside her for 3 years, with that same expression. The old, quiet one. The one that now, looking back, none of them could believe they hadn't recognized. The doors closed. She was gone. The black vehicles arrived at 1:53 a.m. Not 1:04. They came without sirens, without lights. They simply appeared in the hospital's rear parking area, the one visible from the administrative wing's ground floor windows, and stopped in a configuration that James Ortiz, watching from the break room window with a cup of coffee halfway to his lips, would later describe as tactical. He didn't know why that word came to him. He just knew that the arrangement of those vehicles was not random. The men who got out were not police. They wore civilian clothes, dark, unremarkable, but they moved with a uniformity and spatial awareness that civilian clothes could not disguise. They took positions, one at the main entrance, one at the emergency bay, 2 at the rear. Not aggressive, not drawing weapons, simply present. in a way that made every exit of Mercy General Hospital feel simultaneously visible and controlled. The figure in the suit came in through the front. Medium height, gray at the temples, a face that gave nothing away. He walked directly to the reception desk as though he had been to this hospital before, which he had not, and presented identification that the overnight receptionist, Janet, 23 years of hospitals, unflappable, looked at once, looked at again, and then placed very carefully on the desk, as if uncertain what to do with it. The ID bore a seal she recognized. Not a hospital seal, not a state agency seal. Federal. 3 letters she could read, but whose meaning in this context took a moment to assemble into something her brain could accept. "I'm looking for the nurse who was terminated tonight," the man said. "Maya Chun." Janet stared at him. "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. The man looked at her with the patience of someone accustomed to this reaction. "Because she may be in danger. And because the patient she saved tonight is someone we've been protecting for 11 months. Upstairs, the charge nurse on duty had been called to the administrative office. James Ortiz, still holding his coffee, had followed on instinct. The man in the suit was there when they arrived. He introduced himself simply. A name, a rank, Colonel, not Mr. Colonel, and an agency affiliation that he delivered without fanfare, in the same tone someone might name a supermarket. Then he asked, again about Maya. And James, because he was the kind of man who told the truth even when he wasn't sure if he should, told him about the termination, about Webb, about the 6 words, about the elevator. The colonel listened without expression. When James finished, the colonel looked at the floor for a moment. Then he picked up his phone, made a call, said 4 words, "Find her. Priority 1," and hung up. "Who is she?" James asked. The colonel looked at him. What he said next landed in the room with the quiet gravity of something that rearranges how you see the past. "Her name isn't Maya Chun." "Not exactly. It's the name she was given for this assignment." He paused. "Her actual name is Major Maylin Zhang, United States Army Special Operations. Specifically, she holds qualifications in combat medicine, tactical field surgery, and close protection operations that represent approximately 9 years of training and active deployment in environments I'm not at liberty to describe." James sat down. He didn't decide to sit. His body just found a chair. The colonel continued. "She was placed at this hospital 11 months ago as part of a protective detail. The patient she saved tonight, the man in room 12, is a federal witness. He has been in protective custody since last March. His location, his identity, and his medical condition were all classified. When his health began declining 2 weeks ago, we needed someone with both medical expertise and operational security clearance inside this facility without raising flags. Major Zhang volunteered. Dana had appeared in the doorway at some point. She was gripping the doorframe with both hands. She was undercover, Dana said. It wasn't quite a question. She was working, the colonel said. There's a difference. For 3 years. The original placement was for 90 days. The operation extended. She stayed. He said it simply, as if staying for 3 years in a role that required her to conceal everything she was a minor logistical adjustment. James thought about the break room, the wall she always sat against, the scars on her shoulder, the hand that moved toward a place where something used to be. He thought about the medication error she'd caught, the code she had predicted, the way she'd stood at the stairwell door listening to a crisis on another floor with her weight forward. 9 years of deployment, combat medicine, tactical field surgery. He thought about the Webb look, about 6 words delivered to a woman who had saved a man's life, delivered by a man who did not know, who could not have known, what he was actually saying them to. Where is she now? James asked. We're locating her, the colonel said. He glanced at his phone. His expression shifted, just barely. Something that was almost, not quite, but almost relief. She's nearby, he said. She wouldn't leave the perimeter. Not until she knew he was stable. Dana made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The sound of something falling into place. They found her in the hospital's east parking structure. 3rd level. She was sitting on a concrete barrier with a clear sight line to the ICU windows on the 3rd floor, watching the light in room 12 with the focused, unhurried patience of someone on a watch that hadn't ended. She had not left. She had never been going to leave. The colonel approached her with 2 of his men flanking him at a respectful distance. She heard them long before they reached her, the particular rhythm of trained footsteps, the spacing that said federal, said practiced, said we're colleagues, not threats. She didn't turn until he was 12 feet away. Colonel Briggs, she said. Major. A pause. The city lights below. The distant sound of traffic. He's stable, Briggs said. I know. She had been watching the monitors through the window. Of course she had. The termination will be resolved. Administrative error. Webb will be informed that your conduct tonight was not only sanctioned, but required under operational parameters he was never cleared to know about. She nodded once. You should have told us the situation was escalating, Briggs said. Not accusatory. Just true. There wasn't time, she said. His condition dropped faster than the medical team responded. I made a decision. You made the right decision. She looked at him. I know. What happened next moved fast, the way the right endings do. Her reinstatement was signed within the hour, not by Webb, who was by that point in a very quiet conversation with the hospital's legal counsel and a federal attorney, learning in careful detail the precise magnitude of what he had done, but by the chief medical officer, who had been pulled from sleep and briefed with the urgency appropriate to the situation. The patient in room 12 was awake by 3 a.m. He asked for one thing. Not a phone call. Not water. Not a doctor. He asked for the nurse. And Maya Chun, Major Malin Zhang, walked back through the door of Mercy General with her badge returned and her name cleared, and sat beside the bed of the man she had protected for 11 months, and said nothing for a long time. Outside, the military vehicles remained until dawn. By morning, they were gone. By morning, everything looked exactly as it had before. Except it wasn't. Later, Dana would try to explain it to people who hadn't been there. The strange grief of realizing you'd known someone for 3 years and hadn't known them at all. The stranger comfort of realizing that everything you had admired about them, the steadiness, the quiet competence, the grace under pressure, had been completely real. She hadn't been pretending to be good at her job. She was good at her job. Both jobs. Dr. Webb resigned 4 months later. He cited personal reasons. Nobody in the department seemed particularly affected. Maya, she was still Maya to the people who worked with her, whatever her files said, returned to the floor for exactly 3 more weeks before her assignment officially concluded. On her last day, she brought lunch in the same plain black container, ate it in exactly 15 minutes, and left without ceremony. She left one thing behind. Her commendation, the one from the psych incident, still in her locker. Dana kept it. Some people walk into your life looking like something ordinary, and then one day, in a single terrible, beautiful moment, you find out exactly what they are.